the NCAA, likely to settle the NIL lawsuit. Now you have the SEC and Big Ten coming up with a revenue sharing proposal. How quickly do you think this NIL thing could change, which in turn could affect Tennessee, who's one of the best programs in the nation at handling NIL? I ask you that question, Caleb.
I think this NIL thing is going to get solved now very, very soon. A few things all happened at once, believe it or not, that make this kind of interesting. So let's just break down a few things that happened. The NCAA is in talks to settle the antitrust case. A lot of legal experts thought this might happen, which basically means they are going to reach a deal, and the NCAA is more than willing to reach a deal, which is kind of, I didn't see. So this is a way to save themselves. Now, settling, theoretically, they're still in violation of antitrust laws. They just don't want this to get all the way to the Supreme Court, where they could get everything struck down. So that would mean figuring out some sort of revenue sharing. So ESPN reported the settlement. At the same time, Dennis Dodd of CBS reported that the SEC and the Big Ten are developing a plan to share revenue with players. And they're basically doing this against this backdrop of the NCAA looking to settle. The settlement money alone could cost universities between $15 and $20 million, apparently. And so it's all powerful administrators, but the SEC and the Big Ten are kind of leading the charge on that. Then there's a third layer, and this is very intriguing, Dave. And I feel like this plays into this somehow. I don't know how. But as this was happening, UAB, which is not a Power 5 or Power 4 school, joined the Players Association on the known as athletes.org, making them basically unionize. And they did it at the encouragement of current head coach Trent Dilfer. Yes, that Trent Dilfer who won a Super Bowl, maybe the worst quarterback ever to win a Super Bowl, is now coaching UAB. And
it's a little bizarre to me. Is that a nonprofit? Because to get a .org instead of a .com or one of the other dots, typically you have to be a nonprofit. I mean, is this somebody doing it out of the kindness of their heart? I bet not. I bet it's somebody that's looking for a little bit of money. I would surely think so.
It's basically a players association for college athletes. So they are trying to it sounds like they're trying to get players to start working to unionize. And it's mostly women's basketball and men's basketball teams, but UAB joining obviously is very intriguing. So this is all happening at once. I think, quite honestly, the goal of the SEC and the Big Ten is, I could be wrong about this, but they don't want players unionizing. If there's a settlement and there's some sort of model, the SEC and Big Ten want to try.
I don't want you and Stacy unionizing.
Yeah, exactly.
I don't want you, my wife, and our writers, and Josh Ward and Jimmy to unionize. No, nobody wants a union. No employer wants a union.
Right, which is why they try to take the smart employers try to take as good a care as their employees as possible, so they won't get the union, so they won't unionize. I mean, and so the SEC and the Big Ten are probably leading a way to figure out a revenue model. I don't know how this all ends up, though, but I will say this. It sounds like the NCAA is getting it out to be saved if they actually can work with the SEC and the Big Ten to create a revenue model that works.
Well, they'll screw it up. Here's what it feels like to me. It feels like to me it's the Big Ten and the SEC versus the NCAA. It doesn't feel like they're lockstep and barrel anymore. And you tell me if I'm wrong. Brought to you by Don Self at State Farm. Customer service still matters. For 40 years, they built their business on taking care of their customers in the greater Chattanooga area. Go to donself.net. donself.net. Don Self, State Farm. I know you want to save money, but when you put that claim in, you want to make sure it's taken care of. Caleb, what do you make of my statement?
That they'll screw it up?
No, that it feels like it's the SEC and the Big Ten on one side, and it's the NCAA on the other. It feels like the NCAA is trying to hold everything together, but the Big Ten and SEC are just an inch away from jumping into that super conference.
Oh, they probably. I think there may be some things the Big Ten and SEC don't want to have to handle, though. I think they don't really want to handle the revenue sharing model. I'm just going to be honest with you. I think it's very possible that's not something they want to deal with. And so, given that fact, I could see them willing to work with the NCAA to figure this out. But you're right. The NCAA's entire existence has been trying to figure out how to funnel more money to themselves at the expense of the players. And
I think with the SEC and the Big Ten, it's to that point where I've never been cheated on, but I understand if somebody gets cheated on and they bring that person back, you're on a 1 strike penalty. So I get the feeling that the Big Ten and the SEC is saying to the NCAA, we'll try to work this out, but just know we've got 9 toes out the door and you better not screw this up, because I bet they will. I don't think there is going to be the acronym NCAA in 10 years. I don't believe that's going to exist.
Well, I could see that. I could see that happening. It depends on how this all plays out. The NCAA. So, do you think the NCAA will no longer exist because they've lost all power and it's just the natural progression, or do you think they won't exist because they have a chance to exist, but they're just going to bungle their chance and they're too incompetent?
Bungle, but I look at it from a business model and it seems like the right way to go. I mean, what's the NCAA doing to earn their money? I mean, the Big Ten and the SEC, they're putting out great football teams. They're putting out a great product. To me, the NCAA, they're just kind of hanging on, trying to get those last few paychecks. It doesn't feel like they're working together with the Big Ten and the SEC at all to me.
No, it's not. They're trying to, basically, they would like to have control over everything, and the Big Ten and the SEC are starting to think, well, and because the NCAA does have the power for control over the other sports, but football's such a giant revenue generator. You know who we've let off the hook for this, and we should be attacking more?
Good show.
More reference. Than the NCAA? I'm sorry?
Good show reference.
Good show reference. We've let a lot of incompetent school administrators off the hook for this. And here's what I mean by that. One of the reasons the NCAA is losing power is because college football is getting more and more sucked into, a select group of teams that 10, 20, 30, 40 years ago have been making the decision to make college football a priority. Let's be honest, Dave. Many NCAA programs at the Division I level that had the chance to make college football a priority just didn't do it because it was too much work. And I think they have fallen by the wayside because of that. And you know this. It's much easier to invest in basketball and then take your check for being in a Power 5 conference or even in a Lower 5 conference, take your football check and call it a day, right? It's much easier to do that. It's hard to do the legwork to invest in football. And in the 80s and the 90s, too many programs were content to be basketball schools and not worry as much about their football program. And then now they're complaining about getting caught flat-footed as football is sucking up all the revenue and all the centralized power, which is where the SEC and Big Ten come into play. And they are basically, those other schools are turning to the NCAA to save them. And I think, well, sorry, you should have made this investment. You should have done what Louisville did. Say whatever you want about Louisville. They are a basketball school, but they saw 30 years ago what was happening, and they decided to fully invest in football, as we know. And now they're in a Power 5, Power 4 conference because of it. Most of those other schools did not do that. Many of the Power 4 schools weren't doing it, which is why, as you and I have talked about, in this super conference, a school like Wake Forest should be left out because they didn't try to invest in football 20 years ago, 30 years ago.
Turning back to NIL for a moment, can we both agree that Tennessee does not want anything to change? They want more deregulation, right?
Tennessee's the Yankees of college football. Yes. They don't want a salary cap. They don't want anything. They want to be able to buy the talent. Tennessee is what Jerry Jones wished he could have with the Cowboys, with the NFL. Because Jerry Jones would just write blank checks for athletes to go win a Super Bowl, wouldn't he? If he could.
Oh, yeah. I would love for there to be no salary cap. It'd make me a totally different Cowboys fan.